This is actually a step-by-step walkthrough which will cover these 14 important topics with hands-on coding. I have covered everything you need to learn to work with single-dimensional array efficiently on your day-to-day job. And I assure you, if you watch all these short videos, you won't need any other video or tutorial on these topics again. Welcome, I'm from CodeBuns. In today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at single-dimensional array in C#. In my next video will be on the C# rectangular array. So keep watching. Please subscribe to this channel and make sure to hit the bell icon to receive notifications of my latest videos. So what is single-dimensional array? You can think of this array as a numbered list of items. This number is referred to as item index, or you can say item key in the array. And with the help of this number index, you access each item in the array. Remember this, index will always be a numeric value, a number. Actually, array stores multiple values of the same type. I repeat, it stores multiple values of the same type in a single variable, like this array of integer values, string values, etc. Single-dimensional array is also called one-dimensional or 1D array. It's up to you whatever you name it. Suppose this is the array, and these boxes are the array elements, or you can say array items. I will use the word items interchangeably with the elements. Now if I add 8 elements of the same type in this array, like integer values from 1 to 8, then their indexes will be from 0 to 7. The index of the first element of an array always starts with 0. The index of the second element is 1, and so on. But the index of the last element is always 1 less than the total number of elements in the array. The smallest index is called lower bound, and the largest index is called upper bound. I'm talking about the index here, this part. So don't mix it with the array elements or values. Now is the important part. If you try to use an index that's greater than the upper bound, in this case an index of 8, C# compiler will throw IndexOutOfRangeException. It's a type of error. Let's start with the syntax. You can create an array using one or two statements. To declare an array, you first define the type of items you want to store in the array. Now these items can be integer, float, double, string, etc. Followed by empty opening and closing square brackets. Now I give the array a name. Name of the array is usually plural because array is a collection of items. Name like movies, fruits, ages, countries, etc. However, this statement only declares the variable. It doesn't yet initialize an array. You do the initialization part with the new keyword, followed by the data type, and a second set of square brackets containing the length or size of an array. Now this statement creates an array object. Basically, array is a reference type, an object. So with the initialization statement, memory on the heap, which is a dynamic memory, is allocated to hold the elements of an array. This length is the fixed number of elements that the array can hold. And once array initialized with the values using this statement, then this length cannot be changed. That means you cannot increase or decrease the size of an array. It's a fixed size. I will explain everything in the demo, so don't worry if you miss something. Pay attention. When you initialize the array with this statement, the default value is automatically assigned to the array elements for that data type. Suppose you declared and initialized an integer array with the length of 4. When you access the array and try to print the values, you get 4 zeros out of the array. Why is that? Because the default value of int type or integer type is 0, which is automatically assigned to the array elements when you initialized it with this line of code. You can use another way to declare and initialize the array at the same time on a single line like this. I'm going to use this C# online editor for the demo. You can find the link in the description. Let's declare an array first. Here I have just declared a variable called int_values, and it's an integer array. In order to use this array, I need to initialize it. Let me do that. I have initialized the array with the new keyword, followed by the data type, and a set of square brackets. Click Run. This will generate error. Why is that? Because you need to tell how large you want the array to be during the initialization time. I say 4. I have just defined an integer array with the size of 4. Now this array can hold 4 elements of integer type. I already told you, once array is created, then this length cannot be changed. You can combine both these statements together, meaning declaration and initialization at the same time on a single line like this. You can also use var keyword with the array, instead of this explicit data type to declare a variable. C# compiler automatically infers the data type, or you can say assume the data type, based on the value you assign on the right side of the assignment operator. From this part. Pay attention. One thing to note here. When you use var keyword, then new keyword must be used on the right side with the initialization statement. Otherwise C# compiler will generate an error. Let me show you. If I remove this new keyword, you get the error. So with the var keyword, new keyword must be used on the right side with the initialization statement. If you want to check the number of elements in the array, then there is a length property for that. This is the length of an array. What if I want to get the index of the last element of an array? There is a GetUpperBound method for that. You need to pass dimension in this method. This is 1D array, so I will pass 0. You can see upper bound of an array here, which is 1 less than the array length. Or you can say 1 less than the total number of array elements. There is also a GetLowerBound method. You can see the lower bound of an array here, which is always 0. When you create an array, each element in the array is initialized to a default value. This default value depends on the data type of an array. These are the default values for the data type. In case of numeric type, like integer, it's 0. And for reference type, like array or string data type, is null. Let me show you what is the default value assigned to each element of this array. To display all the values, I'm using foreach loop. That's the simplest way to iterate through every item in the array. Let me quickly explain it to you. Here, I have declared an int variable named value that is used for looping. Why I have used int type? Because our array is integer type and each item in the array is integer value. Each time the loop runs, an element from this array is assigned to this variable, where this statement simply prints out the number, which is the value of this variable. The default value of the numeric type is always 0. That's why all the elements in the array have been assigned a value of 0. 4 elements with 0 values. You can reference array elements using this array indexing syntax. This is very useful syntax. What you do is, you use index inside square brackets and then assign a value to it. With this syntax, the value is assigned to a single array element, one value at a time. Let's assign some values. Index of the first element is always 0. Now this part will reference the first element of an array. And once referenced, value 1 will be assigned to it using this part. Easy, right? Click run. You can see the output here. But wait, what is this 0, 0 after 1 and 2? You actually filled the array with the values 1 and 2, right? The indexes assigned to these values is 0 and 1. But the array length is 4. If you look at the image, indexes 2 and 3 have not been assigned any value and still contain the default value of 0. That's why you see 2 spots with 0 values. Okay, let's assign more values to the array. Now you see 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's add another value at the end of an array. So I say tell me what happens if I do this. Click run. This int values array contains 4 integer elements. It uses index from 0 up to 3 to assign values to these 4 elements, right? The upper bound of the array is 3. If you try to use an index 4 which is greater than the upper bound, index out of range exception will be thrown when this statement executes. You can see the error detail here. Keep in mind, you cannot change the size of an array. That means you cannot add or remove elements from the array. But yes, you can replace the elements easily. The only way to add fifth element is to create a larger array. Let's access array elements individually using an index. This is the syntax. Array name followed by an index position inside the square brackets. You can use this syntax to retrieve the value at a specific position in the array. Let's access first element with an index 0. Click Run. You can see the value here. Actually, array is a single block of memory in which the items are stored sequentially, one after another. So, knowing the index of a particular item in the array is the same as knowing its physical location in the computer's memory. That's why array is extremely fast and efficient when it comes to locating an item using an index. Let's look at this line. You tell the computer, retrieve the fourth item in the array, and you pass an index 3. The computer skips the first 3 elements and jumps to the fourth item right away, without counting from the beginning of the array to the fourth item. That's why, when it comes to accessing items, nothing can beat the array. Okay, what if I do this? What do you think will be displayed? It's fine to pause video for a few moments while you decide. Okay, let's see. Crashed. If you try to access the element and pass an index that doesn't exist in the array, an exception or error is thrown with this message, IndexOutOfRangeException. This makes sense because there is no element with an index 4 in this array. To avoid the error, you can do this. This if condition will tell you whether 4 is a valid index into the array or not. If the index I am using is less than the array length, then it is safe to use the index. See, no error. What if I want to update the value of an element at a specific position in the array? To update the value of an array element, use the same array notation syntax you used to assign the value, which is this one. Remember, if you already assigned a value to an index, any new value with the same index will override the current value. I mean, new value will override the existing value. Let me show you. Index 2 already has a value 3, but this statement will replace the value from 3 to 10. You can see the value of 10 here, replaced with the value of 3. Right now, the size or length of an array is 4. And you can see I have assigned 4 elements to it. Here is another question for you. What happens if I change the size from 4 to 3? This will throw an error. You can see the error detail here and the type of error generated. I have already explained this to you. The length you use for the array must match the number of values assigned to it. This length is actually the number of elements within the array. That means if the length is 3, then the number of elements assigned to it must be 3. Okay, what happens if I change this value from 3 to 5? Everything is fine. This is because the 5th spot in the array still gets the default value of 0, as you can see here. That means you can always use the length greater than the number of elements assigned to the array. but the length cannot be less than the number of elements in the array. In short, length can be greater than, but it cannot be less than the number of elements. Change this value back to 4. Let's explore another way to assign values to the array. This approach is better than the previous one, and I encourage you to use this approach whenever possible. I have already explained to you array indexer syntax, where you could assign a single value one at a time. With array initializer syntax, you can assign all the values at once. Remember this, array initializer syntax is useful when you are creating an array of known size and want to quickly specify the initial values. Let's look at the example. You use pair of curly braces. And inside the curly braces, write the values that you want this array to contain. Let's set those values. 1 is going to be at index of 0. Then you separate each value with the comma. 2 is going to be at index of 1. 3 at index 2. And finally 4 at index 3. With this syntax, you can fill the array elements with the values all at once, as you can see here. One thing to note here, the type and the length you use for the array must match with the number of values assigned to it. I mean to say, this length is actually the number of elements in the array, which must be of integer type. You can omit the size and type of an array with this syntax. With var keyword, the type of the array can be inferred from the types of the item, as long as they are all of the same type. In this example, now the length of an array will be equal to the number of elements in the initialization list, 4 in this case. In fact, you don't even need to put this new keyword at the square brackets here. This is the most commonly used shorter form. One thing to remember here, to work with this syntax, you need to explicitly define the data type on the declaration side, on the left side of the assignment operator. First, I introduce foreach loop to iterate through all the elements of an array. Actually, foreach loop is simple and is heavily used during development. But I want to use another loop that you can use with the array, that is for loop. Okay, let me code for loop first, then I explain it to you. This is the basic structure of for loop. Click run. This loop writes out all the integers from 0 to 3. Now I want to use this array with the loop. And for that, I need to change two things in this loop. The first part is this one, where the value of 4 is hard-coded. This expression, or you can say condition, I less than 4, tells the loop to execute repeatedly till the counter, which is I, is less than 4. In other words, keep looping till the value of I is less than 4. Now instead of this hard-coded value 4, I need to replace it with the total number of elements in the loop. This total number is required for the loop iterations. What do you think? How can I get the total number of elements in the array? Simply with the length property. Let me change the code. Loop will work the same way. because this statement will return the total number of elements in the array, which is 4. The second part I want to change is this. This is where I want to print out the values assigned to the array. And to achieve that, I need to use array notation syntax or array indexer syntax. Instead of hard coding a number here, like 0, 1, 2, and 3, with each loop iteration, I pass the value of I variable as an index in the square brackets. This statement will retrieve all the values from an array one at a time. You can see the output here. Now this for loop is dynamic because there are no hard-coded values in the loop. If I add another value at the end of an array, now this new value will change the array length from 4 to 5. The loop will iterate 5 times till the value of I is less than the array length. In most cases, all the elements in the array will contain same type of data, and you will declare the array with that data type. However, if you don't know what type of data array will contain, you can declare the array with the object data type. Then each element of an array can contain any data type, like array of string and integer data type. Let me show you. This array contains string and integer values. That's why I have declared it with the object data type. I cannot do this. C# compiler will generate an error. Or this. One thing to note here, when you use object data type with the array, then always use var or object in the for each loop. Why is that? Because you cannot use int data type like this. Or string. This will generate error because you don't know what type of value will be passed to this variable from this array.